Good evening. I'd like to call this special meeting of the Hartford Charter Revision Commission meeting to order. And we will begin with the roll call. James Wolf is here. Raul de Jesus.
Present.
John Gale. John, I see you on the screen. Alexandra Ponte.
Here.
Aruna Naralampalam.
Here.
Right in time. Nicely done.
James, John Gale is here.
Thank you, John. Steve Bonafonte. Vicky Gallen Clark.
Present.
Kamora Harrington. Kenneth Kennedy. Kathleen Kowalishin.
Here.
Melvin Medina. Yadira Rivera. Bruce Rubenstein. Eon Smith. Okay, we have a quorum. I'd like to move on to item number 2, the approval of the minutes from September 16th, 2021. I'd like to entertain a motion.
So move.
A second.
Second.
The motion's been made and properly seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? The ayes have it and the motion carries. All right, we will move on to now to our panel discussion regarding the Hartford Board of Education. And tonight we are going to start with presentation number 1 entitled Setting a Legal Context. And we have with us tonight Brig Smith, who's the General Counsel for the City of Middletown. Prior to serving in the city of Middletown, he was one of the youngest city attorneys in the history of Lansing, Michigan. He went to a little-known law school, Harvard Law School, and he brings a wealth of knowledge. We're excited to have him kind of lay the groundwork here for us this evening. So Brig, thank you again, and feel free to take it away.
That's the kindest introduction I've had in a long time, and certainly kinder than I deserve. So thank you. It's actually really good to be here, and I'm actually grateful to Steve Mednick for the opportunity. Steve, as you may know, is the counsel that we retained in the city of Middletown to do our charter revision. And one of the most important parts of that process was Steve setting up various panels. And our commission got an incredible amount of wealth of information and insight and experience out of those panels. Hopefully, I can give you at least some semblance of what the panels gave us. So I will do my very best. I understand my best may not be the best that is possible, but it's the best that I can give you. Part of why it's going to be the best that I can give you is that I'm a general counsel by nature, which means my knowledge base is general. My experience is specific to the city of Middletown, so I can share with you some of what we've seen in Middletown, some of what we've been going through with our own Charter Revision Commission with respect to the Board of Education. But I will have a less specialized knowledge, perhaps, than many of the subject matter experts here, and certainly than your principal subject matter expert, Steve, will have. But I will give you what I've got. And so what I've got is, let me start with sort of an overview. And I think boards of education are kind of like a platypus. Are they mammals? Not sure. They're mammals that lay eggs. How do you classify them? And what I mean by that is that in Connecticut, boards of education have a dual status. They're agents of the state, certainly with respect to education, but they're also municipal officers under state law. And so they have, as you know, these two worlds that they live in, and they're sort of neither here nor there in many respects. Now, in one respect, and one of the important things that you're doing here is the charter helps set up whether it's classified as a mammal or not, in what respects it's a mammal or not. So the dividing line again is, and I'm sure many of you already know this, but it's a statewide concern versus a local concern. So the Connecticut Supreme Court has held that local charter provisions are binding on boards of education if they're not, I think it's inconsistent or inimical to the efficient and proper operation of the local boards. And I think it's a 1980 case, Aspey versus New Britain, that set that up. So what you have to do, and what Steve's helped us to look for in our own process in Middletown, is if there's an actual conflict. And most times there's not going to be. So to conflict, you actually have to have an actual statewide concern, an actual educational concern in the statute that is dedicated to the state versus a matter of local concern. And one of the cases that set up that principle was Wallingford versus Wallingford Board of Education. It's a Connecticut Supreme Court case from 1965. And it stood for the proposition that, if the charter in Wallingford wanted to set up civil service requirements for non-certified employees, that was perfectly fine because setting up those requirements did not implicate the statewide mandate for education for our kids. And in Middletown, we have a similar requirement. We, in fact, do have a civil service system for our non-certified employees. So that's one of the tension points that you often see in the city versus the Board of Education, the relationship. Another one comes with respect to school buildings. So you'll see in, and I think it's actually the materials that you have in front of you, there's a quote from CGS 10-220, and it says that boards of education, quote, shall have the care, maintenance, and operation of buildings, lands, apparatus, and other property used for school purposes, and at all times shall ensure all such buildings and all capital equipment contained therein. And so what it says is that the boards have the care and maintenance. They have that duty for care, maintenance, and operation. What it does not say is that they own those buildings. So the ownership remains with the cities. And again, this is sort of that that dance that the Connecticut Constitution and our statutes require us to do to figure out that balance. Now, in the city of Middletown, we have been working with our Board of Education for years on the various school properties that we have. And the trick always becomes, what is the school purpose and what is not? You'll often see this sort of after hours use of school facilities, track and field facilities. If the community wants to get in there and be able to use, say, the soccer fields, the football fields, the track for walking, who knows what. That's one of the things that the school board and the city have to work out, because it's one of those areas where the school board has care, maintenance, and operation, but nonetheless, it's owned by the city and has to have some sort of interplay between the two. Now, you'll notice in there that there's a provision that says that the boards of education will ensure the buildings and capital equipment in it. And in the city of Middletown, we've been working with our board for time immemorial through the Connecticut Interlocal Risk Management Association, CIRMA, and they've provided insurance both for the BOE liability, property and casualty, and also for the city. And I'll say, that's not just a good idea, it's actually the law. So under 10-241C, the law actually requires boards of education to consult with municipalities about purchasing jointly property and casualty insurance and workers' compensation insurance. And there's a similar requirement under 10-241D for goods and services and doing cooperative agreements. So the law absolutely tells boards and municipalities that they have to work together. Obviously, how you do that is one of the tricky parts. And that's one of the things that a charter can do and should do. So let me just sort of wrap it up by giving you Middletown's experience and what we're working on right now. So I mentioned that we're going through a charter revision process even as we speak. I'm hopeful that it will pass in the November election. But one of the things that we have been doing in Middletown is to try to very clearly define what the roles of the board and the city are. And Middletown is, if boards generally are a platypus, Middletown is maybe an aardvark, maybe a dodo. I don't know. We are very unusual. We are one of just a few municipalities in the state where the chief executive official of the city, the mayor in this case, has hire and fire authority over Board of Education non-certified employees. And so in Middletown's charter, it has been inculcated even more directly than other boards of education across the state might be, because of that direct hire and fire authority. Now, like any relationship, it works well when the personalities work well together. And generally speaking, over the history that we've had in the city of Middletown, those have been good personalities and good relationships. But when they're not, and it becomes a problem. So what we've done in Middletown, what we're looking to do is actually split off responsibilities so that the superintendent will have hire and fire and disciplinary authority for non-certified employees. And then the city will maintain its own HR needs with respect to its non-certifieds. This may be more information than you need, but let me give you what I've got. So one of the challenges that we're working through right now is that the non-certified employees of the BOE are part of the same union as the general employees at the city of Middletown. And so there's an entire milieu of labor law that applies as well, that has to be sort of worked through. And we've been working through that with the unions, but really the trigger in all of this is going to be the charter revision and what will be a more formal bifurcation of those duties and responsibilities that would get Middletown at least back up to platypus status to join the rest of the state of Connecticut in that regard. But it's been a heck of a ride. It's been a lot of fun. We've really enjoyed having Steve as our guide along that ride. And to the extent that I can point out any bumps that we've had, I'm happy to do that. And hopeful for our journey to come to a successful conclusion, and we'll hope the same for you. So if there's any way I can help, any questions that I can answer, I'm happy to be your pinata. So swing away.
Great. Thank you, Brig. I will open it up to questions from the commissioners. I will note that if you would like to ask Brig a question, please use the raise hand function or physically raise your hand, and I will call on you in the order that I see your hand raised, and we'll take it from there. So any questions for Brig? Okay. Seeing none, Brig, I think you're off the hook.
Oh, I do see
Excuse
one
me,
hand.
sorry, we have Commissioner Gallen-Clark. I apologize.
That's okay. Thank you, Chair. Attorney Smith, would you go back over, you said we're moving toward, go back over what you're moving toward and the rationale for making that change.
Yes, ma'am. So we are moving toward what is the model mostly through the rest of the state, which is the superintendent has the actual hire and fire authority for BOE employees. And in Middletown, again, the hire and fire authority is with the mayor. We're doing that. This mayor, this superintendent get along famously. Okay, the prior mayor and prior superintendent got along famously. That hasn't always been the case. That won't always be the case. And so that's what we're moving towards, is to get us to sort of the model that the rest of the state really uses and has used.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Any further questions? Okay, seeing none, now I think you're off the hook, Brig. Thank you.
Thank you all for your time, and really good luck to you all.
Thank you. All right, we will now move on to our next presentation entitled Where Are We Now and Where Are We Going? And we're very excited to have three panelists with us tonight. We have Dr. Leslie Torres Rodriguez, the Superintendent of Hartford Public Schools. We have Aisha Clark, the Chair of the Hartford Board of Education. And we have Nick LeBron, Councilman and Chair of the Labor, Education, Workforce, and Youth Development Services Committee. And so I've asked each of our panelists this evening to come speak to us briefly, to provide an overview on their take of the board's role here in Hartford, what it's been like in their current roles, their thoughts on the current structure and composition of the Board of Education, and then any other recommendations that they have for changes to the charter, and anything else that they think would be relevant to tonight's discussion as we embark on a look at Chapter 9 of our charter here in Hartford. So we will go in the order that we have listed here on the agenda, and I will kick it over to Dr. Leslie Torres Rodriguez to start.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for the invitation. I did have three essential questions, so I just want to make sure that I'm answering those, and that is to speak to my role as superintendent, my relationship with formally and informally with the Board of Education, and the same thing, my relationship formally and informally with the mayor and the city council. Is that still accurate?
Yes, that is.
Thank you. So my role as superintendent, which is, governed by Connecticut General Statute 10-157A, is as the Chief Executive Officer of the Board of Education. And so that means that superintendent has all of the executive authority over the school system or the school district and the responsibility for its supervision. Superintendent is responsible for the implementation, the administration of the policies that are adopted by the Board of Education, and the execution of board decisions and all of the operations and management related to any school programming, and also for keeping the board informed about not only the operations, but the progress of the school district. And that is also as per board policy. With regard to the relationship, I mean, the question was around informal and formal, like there is no informal relationship. So I can speak to my formal, my role and relationship with the board, which I just described right through my operational oversight and management of the district. There is a whole structure with regard to how the interactions happen, how the reporting happens. For example, we have our monthly board meeting in which I update the board at the Board of Education meetings on progress toward our shared priorities and strategies. There are also weekly communications to the board on weekly happenings and specific data points that we monitor weekly. For example, COVID positivity. Attendance, for example, is another one that gets reported weekly to our board. There's also board monthly workshops that have topics that are directly connected to our four priorities and the strategies. I'll give you an example. We had last month our board workshop, which was around understanding literacy and our state accountability measures. And there's also a structure via our Board of Education committees that has a liaison from my senior executive team. And that is how our work is not only monitored, but also informed by our Board of Education members. And then, of course, I make myself available to the board members as needed. For additional context, those those committee structures specifically focus on finance. There is, of course, a policy committee. There's a teaching and learning committee. There is a school choice and facilities committee, where we discuss progress around our facilities, any capital improvement projects, and also anything relative to school choice. As you all know, we are a school system and we operate within an ecosystem of school choice. So we have that committee that does both. It looks at our facilities, but it also looks at magnet, non-magnet enrollment. And then there is the Family and Community Engagement Committee. The board also has an HR ad hoc committee that gets implemented whenever there is an HR related matter. With regard to the third question as to the relationship and functioning with the mayor, we do have a cadence of meetings. And so there is a bi-weekly meeting with the mayor, with myself and Chairwoman Clark. And in addition to that, there is a variety of not only opportunities, but also structures for the mayor and I or the mayor's senior staff members to interact and develop programming in service of our youth and our families. I am actually a co-chair with the mayor for the Mayor's Cabinet for Young Children that focuses on early childhood services and initiatives across the city. And we work very closely with Ms. Oliver for all of the youth and family programming. And there is a lot of communication and at times problem solving with the city finance team and our finance team, especially as we interact with the Municipal Accountability Review Board. And so outside of those structures, you all might be aware of some of the shared services that exist, right? So there's the MHIS for our information system, which is a shared services and that not only the city has, but we at the school system have as per municipal code. There is shared services with regard to legal. The Office of the Corporation Counsel does provide legal support for us at the Board of Ed. For example, regarding pensions, right? Some Board of Education employees do have rights and even interest in the city's Municipal Employees Retirement Fund. There is a lot of collaboration, conversation, and planning with regard to constructions and renovation projects. There is the Hartford School Building Committee, which oversees school construction projects. We at Hartford Public Schools in isolation do not oversee school construction. That is through the School Building Committee. And we know that both council members and Board of Ed members sit on that committee. And then there's the budget piece where there is the minimum budget budgeting requirement, the MBR, which requires towns to spend a minimum amount per pupil on education based on statewide expenditures. And I do give a presentation, a budget presentation to City Council during our budget process. Aside from that, if there are, council members either pose questions, reach out to me or to my office, or through the mayor's office, we respond accordingly. Let's see. I think I can pause there as to the overview of those three questions, and see if there are any questions, clarifications.
Great, that was very helpful. I think what we may do is we'll have each of the panelists speak and then hold questions for the end. So now we can move. Thank you very much, Dr. Torres Rodriguez. We'll move on to Chairwoman Clark. Chairwoman Clark, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for the invitation. I actually had a lot more questions, so Chairman, if you let me know which ones you want me to address, and then I will dive right into those.
Your role as chair, your relationship with the superintendent, and then your relationship with the mayor and council. I think think the same 3 questions would be fine.
Okay. So thank you for that. So I will start off. I typically love this quote, and this is me as experience as a chair. A leader's emotions and actions prompt followers to mirror their feelings and deeds. And what that resonates with me, and I lead by that, is that as a chair, my attitude, my emotions reflective and mirror my colleagues. And so as a chair, that is what you're held accountable for. And so what I've done is try to ensure that I increase my own emotional intelligence and recognize my own feelings and others to ensure that there's a shared responsibility and governance across the school board. And that's just the smaller aspects of it as it relates to personal reactions according to the board. Obviously, my role as a chair is to preside over the meetings and the governance of the meetings. I am responsible for assigning instruments and acts necessary or prevalent to the board. I consult with the executive committee and the superintendent on planning, execution of agendas and policies. Additionally, as a chairperson, I confer with the superintendent on any crucial matters in between meetings. It can happen at night, during the morning, anytime. If there's any crucial things that are happening, she will reach out to me or I will reach out to her. I am responsible for the appointments of all board members to committees and for board approval. That is under my auspice. I am also responsible for calling any special meetings deemed necessary and or board workshops or executive meetings. That is under my responsibility as the chair. Additionally, I am the public spokesperson of the board, and this is a part of our bylaws that are set up. So any communication relevant to public, media, all of that is under my responsibility or whomever I deem to give it to. And then also is my responsibility as a chair to make sure that there is decorum and orderly conduct throughout all of our board meetings, whether it's a meeting, a workshop, executive session, all of that, making sure that the information that is being spoken, especially relevant to our board, to my colleagues, is that it's germane to the agenda that's on the floor. Additionally, as the chairs, call meetings to order, announce business, enforce policies, enforce codes of business, continually meet with my colleagues, the leadership, and the superintendent on a regular basis. As it relates to my relationship with the superintendent, it is what, as the superintendent has described. The only thing that I will add to what she has described is that we have a bi-weekly meeting in which we discuss some prevalent things that are going on throughout the district. And so if there are things that are happening in the community or within the district that I would like to discuss with the superintendent, that is that time where I discuss that with her. There are a lot of times where I'll get communication via email, stopping in the grocery store, anything where I'll bring that to her attention, and I use that time to get back to the constituents, and vice versa. That is a time where she wants to share any prevalent information that is coming down the pipe. She'll share that with me, and then I in return share that with our leadership team and then other colleagues of the board. She also has stated that we have meetings with the mayor and herself. And that's also an opportunity where the things that I might share with her relevant to the constituents within our community, I'll share that with the leadership, with the mayor. As far as city council, the question was the informal and formal relationship. I will say that there is not a true formal relationship between the Board of Education and City Council. I would say it's more of an informal type of relationship where there are things that council has shared with the board, but not necessarily a formal relationship. Some of the things that I think that needs to be clear as far as the formal and informal aspect is that the understanding of a governance board, meaning that how there is a governance board on the board side, and then obviously there's a governance board on the council side. And so there is like that kind of respective line that there is a delineation between the two, and that one is not telling the other what to do, but it can be an established relationship where it can be shared values and goals. So as far as recommendations, I know that was a part of the question. And then the last question is thoughts for the current structure and or changes to the charter. The current structure, as we know it, is that there are 5 appointees and 4 elected positions. Based on my experience, that I would believe that it should be reversed, that there are more appointed positions than there are elected positions, more elected positions than there are appointed positions, because of the influence where if there's more appointed, then there's more driven by the mayor's initiative versus what could be the community. And I'm not saying that's happening currently. I'm just stating that in the past, that has been some of the experience of those having more appointed members than elected. And then additionally, one of the things that's on our charter that I don't know how we can switch it or if there can be some recommendations on that is that the Board of Ed election and the appointments are a little bit trickier than those of the council or any other elected position, whereas the school year starts in August and ends in June. And so a board member is either appointed and or elected in November, and then they take position in January. Therefore, that means that they're taking position in the middle of the school year, and that disrupts the structure of what's happening. That means you're having a turnover of board members and a turnover of leadership. And so that is something that obviously our charter has in place, and or that's something that's throughout many districts, but that is something that I just wanted to bring to you all's attention that does and can cause disruption in our district, in our learning.
Great. Thank you, Chairwoman. And we'll now move on to Councilman LeBron. Councilman LeBron, you have the floor.
Thank you. So I want to thank you, the Charter Commission, for all your work and taking on this daunting challenge. I know I say it every time I come on here. And I also want to thank Dr. Leslie Torres for coming on here and taking time out of her busy schedule. And also to Aisha Park, who's also very busy with a lot of things, and taking the time on and seeing and understanding the importance of what the Charter and the relationship between the Charter and the Board of Ed and the municipalities. What I want to start off with is actually a visual. And this right here is the Connecticut School Law Book, right? And the reason I want to start off with that, because if you look how thick this is, it is actually thicker than my Bible at home, right? So this is school law. So it has everything from soup to nuts to special education to how to fire somebody to, I mean, you know, it really goes into the weeds. But one of the things that it doesn't do is say the cleared line of delineation between a municipality and the Board of Education. And it doesn't really provide any guidance on how to be able to do so. And I want to start off by that because, you know, as the chair of labor education and workforce and youth development, all my work has always been at the intersectionality between mental health and education. Now, with that being said, I'm not a teacher, right? And I'm a pretend teacher. And but I always have worked in education, either through policy or I was a lobbyist, you know, kind of the outside of the building and not necessarily the inside of the building, because God forbid that the scholars would have me as a teacher. I appreciate all that they do. But one of the things as I first came on is I look historically at the past meetings over the last 8 years with the Education Committee, with education as a part of this subcommittee. And what I found is the previous 8 years that there really wasn't anything. It wasn't anything related to education. There wasn't anything that was prominent. I think there was a couple meetings in 2016 where there were some issues at some buildings. And I think it just so happened that the Education Committee this committee was meeting before a city council meeting. And so folks were there. And so they spoke up about some issues that they were having with discipline at a certain school. And so with that being said, you know, why backing up is, and Council President is here and Councilman Gale's here, and they always hear me say this, in that there's three things that kind of dishevel me, disrupt me, whatever language you want to use. And that is process, pro forma, and perception. And so when you talk about processes, in terms of my interaction and the experiences, is that what we've seen and the interactions have been basically rubber stamping everything that comes from the Hartford School Building Construction Committee. Because that has been the established pattern for years. And so for me, we need to determine, right, if it's going to be perfunctory and in essence, a courtesy as a byproduct of our charter, why do it, right? Why are we kind of engaging in this process for the need to engage in processes when there really isn't anything there or anything substantive in terms of lanes? When you heard the superintendent and Dr. Torres Rodriguez and Aisha speak, they very profoundly talk about their interactions with the mayor, and rightfully so, as the chief executive officer, and reporting to him. But what happens is with communication, there may or may not be an assumption that that message gets to the council. And what I will say is that I will wholeheartedly say that it doesn't. And so, so the fact that we have that line of communication and we at the city council are not aware of things, I think that that's problematic. And let me tell you why I believe it's problematic. Because the other issue that I'll say is just in terms of perception. When we engage in community members, and when community members elected all of us and elected me specifically, most of them don't, or at least the people that come to me, do not understand the differentiation between the Board of Ed and City Council. What they do is say, Nick, I have this problem at my kid's school. Help me fix it. And I don't have an answer for them, right? I don't have a clear answer for them, except to build upon the relationships I have at the individual schools. I don't have, or connections that I have, but I don't have the ability, if I see patterns, to change policy. And so, yes, you could probably build an informal relationship, but those things get messy because, again, lines get blurred. I think, so in terms of interaction with the Board of Education, as that elected body, the only interactions that we have, again, is the approval of the mayor's appointments. So again, historically, looking at the past, there has never been one occasion that the city council has ever denied an appointment from the mayor. Now, we could look at that and say maybe the conversations happen in the background, so forth and so on. But I would challenge everyone to say is that we need to look at every legislation, not just between the Board of Education and the city, but processes that are rubber stamping processes or pro forma or perfunctory processes. So in terms of the Hartford School Building Construction Committee, the city council is failing there. And what I mean by that is not the fact of who we have representing, because we have our majority leader, Councilman Clark, there, who's doing the best job that he can. But what I'm saying is that we're failing is because we haven't exercised our right by having 3 appointments there. And for years, it's only been one person. And so Councilman Clark has been taking on the challenging and daunting task of taking the whole school building construction committee on his shoulders. And when I talk about that committee, let me tell you something, in terms of dollars, there's a lot of commas in those meetings. That's just a side joke, but basically it's a lot of money basically in those meetings, and we have one person trying his best. And so when we talk about, potentiality, right? It's, we can highlight the things that we're going through right now. But for me, I think that it's important to, understand, because one of the questions here is the interaction with the superintendent, her team. And the superintendent, comes to the budget, again, as a courtesy, because I'm not sure if we necessarily approve the budget, or maybe we do, but as a courtesy to us. And thank you, Superintendent, for providing us and entertaining, our questions, but during the budget season. And so that's the minimal, and I'm not even sure, Dr. Torres, if you're obligated to do that, to be honest with you. And so that's kind of where we are. So, but with anything moving forward, I think it's important to highlight, potential opportunities. And so instead of digging through this book, what I would behoove the Charter Commission to do is to look nationally to see what systems have been able to improve the relationships between municipalities and boards of education, and not just improve it, but what did they do in particular. So I have some examples here that I wanted to share with everyone, because it's important to always be solution focused. And so, the Oregon School Board, established, successful collaborations. And so they create, there's the potential of creating a joint task force between the city council and the school board, and the school boards, on issues that affect both parties, and where there needs to be cross-sectionality or cross-interference upon our municipalities' bureaucratic departments. And I can think of several, chronic absenteeism as it relates to juvenile justice, as it relates to mental health. Those things are not just the Board of Ed's responsibilities. There's a system responsibility there. And so how can we create joint task force? And so Oregon has developed some processes on local levels. And, you guys can look at it there, where they brought in nonprofits to try to help and share dollars at trying to tackle these problems. This past year, Dr. Torres and Director Kim Oliver came up with the Dr. Torres, where we help the kids do the school online in the nonprofit arena. So that was there's a more official title that sounded terrible, but basically the kids would come in a nonprofit, and the nonprofit, for the families that needed to work, the nonprofit organization would watch the kids, provides some kind of snack and allow them to be able to go online, but also be in a safe space, a COVID safe space as well, so that families can work. That is an excellent idea around collaboration. How can we potentially do that more and bring in nonprofits? There's also, on a potential statewide level, is to form coalitions. In New Jersey, they form coalitions between the state school board association and the League of Municipalities. And so what they did was create joint task force that was a shared responsibility. And so that way you have this task force to kind of dive into breaking down this book with the legal people that can help to decipher this school policy Bible. And then the other thing is to, once we establish those things, is to have clear delineation so that way we can respect the boundaries. It's important to respect the boundaries between each other, because we don't need to have cross interference with each other, because it's just, from a perception standpoint, we don't want to see that in a functioning, relationship. And lastly, by sharing pride and sharing love for our students and everything that we do in the shared experience, it gives the families, and more importantly, it gives the scholars, and shows them that we are servants for them and we're collaborating together. Oftentimes as adults in bureaucratic systems, we create red tapes within ourselves. And by providing more of a collaboration, we can provide more fruitful opportunities and more fruitful and intentional delivery opportunities for the families that we both serve. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. All right. Thank you to all of our panelists. And now we will open it up for questions. And again, please use the raised hand function, commissioners, or raise your hand physically, and I will call on you in the order that I see. Any questions? I saw Commissioner Gallen Clark raise her hand, I believe.
Yes, I would just like to thank all those who came on tonight, Dr. Rodriguez, Chair Clark, and Councilman LeBron. Thank you so much for your presentation. I just have a question, a clarification, Dr. Rodriguez, regarding the shared resources. What did you mention? You mentioned information management. So the city and the Hartford Public School District share that department then?
We do. It's a shared resource, Metro Hartford Information Systems. And so all of our information technology services and resources, not, just to clarify, not instructional technology, right? So it is our internet, our communication systems, but it has nothing to do with, for example, smart boards and projectors and things like that. That's a separate scope of work that we internally at the district manage.
Thank you. And since I do have the floor, Chair, may I go on?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Dr. Rodriguez, and Chair Aisha Clark and Councilman Nick LeBron. If I heard you correctly, and I'm just trying to really summarize one of the main points that I think both of you indicated, that there is an opportunity for the Board of Education and the City Council to work closer together. Is that what I'm hearing in a nutshell? Is that one of the things that you're
Sure.
saying? There's an opportunity.
Yeah, I believe so. I believe there's some clear examples across the country. I just highlighted a few. You know, folks can Google, we have information at our fingertips. And so, there are multiple opportunities where you see municipal kind of city and Board of Ed collaborative processes that not only have clear defined lines between them, but have shared initiatives. Oftentimes when we tackle challenges, it's multi-systemic challenges, right? And so you need to tackle it from a multi-systemic approach. And so, when you try to tackle, removing education, when you try to tackle homelessness without bringing in other towns where, more close to 50% of our population of homelessness is from other towns, how can we have that as a singular, focus from one city? You have to be able to approach things from a multi-systemic approach in order to have clear and really effective outcomes.
Thank you.
Chairwoman Clark, did you want to add anything?
I think that there can be levels or ways in which collaboration can happen. I will just speak from my own experience. I only can speak from my 4 years. There has to be, and again, I would love to see, hear about more places that have done it. But from my experience that I've seen with council and the board, it has been more of like sort of a bullying kind of approach versus a real collaborative effort. And so I have been kind of just guided on how that can happen. But I'm not opposed to it happening. I think that there are definitely, as Councilman LeBron stated, there are opportunities where we're talking about violence in our community, right? We know that the violence that's happening in our community, it's not something that the school board can handle on its own. There is a cross-sectionality between the work that the council, the mayor, and the city as a whole with our community partners are doing along with our district, right? But those people sit at different tables as well. We talk about school discipline, right? We have opportunities where we have collaboration with CBOs, members of different organizations that are coming together, where we have red meetings, we have task force already in place. So I'm hesitant to say that it has to just be the council and the board alone. I think that it's an opportunity for community as a whole to come together and really work and really start talking about the things that are happening now. I think that these task force that Councilman LeBron has talked about, they are happening. The problem is that we need more individuals at the table and more communication about those task force and things that are happening. So prime example, we have the red meeting where we're talking about discipline, we're talking about violence, we're talking about ways that we have tier 1, 2, and 3 approaches of handling violence within our community. But I'm sure that many individuals, maybe even council members, don't know about that particular meeting and what's happening during that time. But there are CBOs from DCF to crisis response to the district to HPD that are involved in those meetings, and those are held monthly. And so again, I'm not opposed to the relationship and the collaboration with council and the board. I just think that it needs to be broader than that, because then we're just adding another meeting and we're meeting to meet and not necessarily seeing work done.
Thank you for that clarification.
Commissioner Gallon Clark, do you have any further questions?
No, not at this time.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Gale.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a couple of questions for the superintendent and a couple for the council president, if I may. Madam Superintendent, going back to the concept of shared services, I know you mentioned, and we just discussed it again, MHIS is a shared service between the city and the board, and you mentioned legal. And I think you touched on the pension. I think we recently tried to come up with a unified I don't remember if it's a 457 plan, but some pension plan that both board employees and city employees can participate in, so that the treasurer isn't administering 6 different plans and maybe he's only administering 4 different plans. But I'm wondering whether it's kind of a twofold question, whether you see the opportunity for there to be other shared services with council, but most importantly for this body, whether you see the need for that to be built into a charter. I mean, obviously, I'm not sure. I think MHIS was just done because board and city agreed it was appropriate money-saving opportunity, and likewise with the pension plan. But I'm wondering if you see, from a charter perspective, that we should actually build something in that would require some shared services, and you know, and I understand the distinction between educational and more on the procedural side. So I'm wondering, you know, sort of like finance as a shared service, or perhaps human resources as a shared service, or maybe those are totally inappropriate. I don't know, but I welcome your comments.
Those are great questions, and I will tell you that we did initially begin to think about a potential shared around HR, and the challenge became all of the added responsibilities that we on the education side have to go through with all of the certifications, right, for all different employees. And so we began having those conversations a few years ago, and then we thought we're not at the ready to do any of that because of all of the interdependencies with the State Department of Education and the certifications that are needed even for our own HR folks in the world of education. With regard to MHIS, what I will say, and I don't know, I'm assuming what you shared with regard to the efficiency in terms of financial, right, efficiency for the sharing of the services for information systems. One thing that we learned and was a significant pain point and a learning for us was when we had to shut down, and right, we were at the mercy of reliable information systems, right? So we saw that first when we had the ransomware attack, right? How crippled we all became, right, by the attack, and then overlay that with the need that we had for internet, just for our teachers to be able to, right, perform their duties and deliver instruction virtually. So that was a pain point from an information system perspective, that there were systems that we clearly learned needed to be tended to. And I'm not saying we weren't paying it. We didn't have staffing dedicated beyond the MHIS staff, which wasn't only dedicated to the information system support. There's this whole other track around the instructional technology that is dependent on the information system resource to work well. Does that make sense? Like, I cannot say to our staff, here are web-based platforms for our students for you to use to improve or augment or engage students differently during your instruction without having, reliable MHIS services, which we do have, but they're working, they're two different tracks, right? Because the instructional technology folks live on the Board of Ed side, and then the MHIS folks, right, they don't necessarily live on the city side, but it's this holistic approach. I don't know if that's making sense, but it almost feels like we have to not do double the work, but there's like this extra step that we always have to think about. Okay, so MHIS is here. This is what it looks like from a information system perspective. Now, how do we filter all of that through the instructional, right? How do we connect that to the curriculum? How do we connect that to how to support our teachers to deliver, right? That resource to the students that's via this new platform. I know I'm getting in the weeds, Councilman Gail, but I just wanted to lift those two examples that we tried to, that we tried to look at with HR, and then some of the pain points that we were not really tending to until we were forced to, when we were shut down with COVID.
All right, well, thank you for that. Kind of a similar question on the use of school buildings. And, you touched on that. Certainly there's been some, I know recently there's been some desire on the part of council to attempt to make greater use of school buildings after school for recreation programs, which would be the city side using a board resource. And again, I mean, I'm not necessarily asking you to comment on whether that's a good idea or bad idea. I understand there's some problems with doing so that involve liability issues and staffing issues from both sides, from the city side, from the board side. But we're a charter revision commission. So again, sort of my question is, do you see anything from a charter perspective that would assist the board in cooperating with the city side? Is there any impediment on the board side that could be lifted with a charter change that would assist the board in cooperating with the city on the use of these buildings, if that makes sense at all?
I think I understand the question. And I don't know what's in the charter, to be completely transparent with you as to that specific question that you're asking. I do know that we have community partners that use our schools. There's a process, right, for that, because of, you raised it, right, liability and staffing, right? Our custodial staff needing to be available. And so I'm not sure that what would need to be lifted if there's a process already for using the facility. Yeah.
And fair enough. I mean, fair enough. That's,
Okay.
that may be exactly the way to go, is just as your community partners are doing it. Well, let me move to the board chair, if I may, and ask a couple of questions there. You talked, Madam Chair, about various ways of interacting with council, and I know we heard Councilman LeBron talk about ways in which other communities have interacted with task forces and collaboration in various other ways. And these are all wonderful things, probably none of which require a charter change. And so again, I'm sort of focused more, I hate to be like coming right down onto, we're here for charter revision. Is there anything that you would see? You mentioned a more formal relationship with council. I'm just wondering if there's anything you've thought about that could be made more formalized that would help you as a board member that you think might be beneficial.
So it's hard because, like you said, on the charter side, it does not really show the relationship between the board and council. It's more on our bylaws when it's related to the committees. And so I think that it could be I guess my suggestion would be, as we're revising our policies, which will be our bylaws, that could be an area where we can strengthen that. But as far as the charter, like you said, our reasoning for being here, I did not see anywhere in the charter that we can specifically highlight that there needs to be this like formalized relationship between the board and the city council.
I think
But
that,
again, my suggestion would be more so on our bylaws that talks about the different committees.
Mr. Chair, if I may, one more question.
Absolutely, yes.
Last question. This is going to become a very political question. We're in the middle of a Board of Education election cycle. You mentioned your thought that there should perhaps be 5 elected members versus 4 elected members presently. But I note that in the election coming up in November, we have exactly 5 candidates for 4 seats. We have had no primaries, and it seems pretty clear, and this is true 4 years ago, it was true, and I think 8 years ago it was true, that there are 3 candidates who are chosen by the Democratic Town Committee, and those 3 candidates are going to be elected. And really, the public has essentially very little voice in any of this. And so what we end up with, and I may be overstating the case, but I think what we end up with is a Board of Education that's chosen by the 78 members of the Democratic Town Committee. And so I started this whole charter revision process. Well, I think my very first comment when I was asked what I looked for in charter revision was to say that I was looking for any way that could improve and make a more robust Board of Education process that could get more public involvement in the election process and more public involvement in picking our board members. And so the question I have for you, because I think it may be, and this actually may come back to Mr. Mednick at some point, but one of the thoughts that we potentially could do is to create a nonpartisan board election, where instead of the 78 members of the Democratic Town Committee choosing who 3 members of the 4 elected members are, everyone has to run nonpartisan. And anybody who's interested would then have to get themselves on the ballot. And I don't know if that would produce a more spirited election, but it might mean that at least everybody's voting for the nonpartisan folks. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about doing such a thing, creating a nonpartisan board.
So I've actually never heard of that. So thank you for bringing that up, meaning that structuring it that way. And I'm pausing because I'm taking in all of the information that you stated. I think what you stated in the beginning, you are correct. Once the Democratic Party or the minority party, at times, not always, has their endorsed person, then it turns into those are the individuals that are on the slate. And then it's more so whoever goes out and vote, those are the individuals that they can go and vote for. So for me, I think one of the biggest things that, true to what you said, thinking about ways that we can get more involvement, I think there needs to be a true focus on ensuring that people understand what a Board of Education process looks like. There's a lot of emphasis on city council, a mayoral run, state representative, governor, so on and so forth, but there's not a lot of emphasis on Board of Education. And when it does happen, it's more so about opinions about what the board is doing and not doing versus true understanding of the structures of Board of Education and what board members have the ability to do and or not do. And so saying all that to say that I will be interested in learning more or understanding more about that before I give my informed decision about yes or no. To your point, that is a really big political jump to just state that now for the charter that it will be removed of stating that a person has to be a part of such parties in order to be a part of the elected side and or appointed side. I think that also will cause for changes, and please don't quote me. So I think we will need Attorney Smith or even Attorney Mazark might know, but this would be more so if our statute states that it has to be specific political parties, whether it's a major and or minor. So that will, if it's changed in the charter, then that means that it might have to be some changes in the statute. And again, I don't know. So I know that didn't answer your question completely, but I am interested to learn more about that.
Thank you for that. I do think if this body decides to go down that road, there are major examples all across the country of elected bodies that are elected on a nonpartisan basis. In fact, I think in Hartford ourselves, we had a nonpartisan city council for many, many years until sometime in the mid 1960s. I think, probably the biggest example today, I think, is Los Angeles. The city of Los Angeles elects on a nonpartisan basis. So we can look at it, but thank you very much for your comments. And
absolutely.
I'm glad that I've, caused you to think about it.
Absolutely. It does change the perspective. I do apologize. No, I was just saying it does change the perspective of getting individuals involved. But it does take the power away from the town committee. And so I'm not sure how that will balance out. Do we encourage the town committee to still have that power and then think about different ways that we can get our constituents involved? Or do we take away that power when it comes to the Board of Ed side? And then what does that look like? Are we setting a precedence for council, mayor, and so on and so forth?
Any other questions for our panel? Attorney Mednick up. I see Commissioner DeJesus. You have the floor.
Good evening and welcome to our panelists, and thank you guys so much for taking time in your busy schedules to come and speak to us. So there's a lot of questions that I had already answered. My question, I guess, is to our superintendent and to the chair. If you guys can probably answer this question together, where are areas where you think the Board of Education and the city can collaborate in, and that in a manner that can be helpful for both sides?
Go ahead, Superintendent. You can start.
Thank you, Chairwoman Clark. One thing that I think will be helpful is for, and I hope it's okay that I don't approach the question from a one side and another side perspective, and I'm going to approach the question from a more holistic, like a larger ecosystem perspective. I think there's an opportunity for shared understanding about what the priorities are citywide. Right, I know what our priorities are in Hartford Public Schools because, like, for example, our new strategic plan was built on 50 hours of engagement with our stakeholders. But I would like, for example, an opportunity to be able to do what we call a crosswalk and say, well, here's the priorities that we heard when we did our engagement, relevant to education, of course, but what are the priorities of the council? What are the priorities of the city? Like, we know what each of the department does, of course, at the city, but like, what are the specific strategies or priorities? So that's something that I just think is just good practice for all of us to kind of know, oh, what are those shared initiatives that we could, Councilman LeBron talked about earlier, chronic absenteeism, right? I know that that's something that is an accountability measure for us at the state and federal level, but we know that there are so many, interdependencies that impact chronic absenteeism, and that broadly, not only at the city, but throughout many of our partners, right? We're trying to address from different angles. So that would be a recommendation that I would have as a starting point.
And for me, just to add to it, one of the things that I've seen done in Mass, it wasn't necessarily a school per se, but it was a CBO. And what it was providing, basically setting aside jobs within the city that did not require certification, but more so training, and providing them to our families, providing them to the families of students. So I would love to see an approach where we're employing our families and building that pipeline so that we are then establishing a work for our families, and then in return having that investment be in our city, and then for our students to have their parents be working. And so I know that's like a far-fetched utopia idea, but that would kind of do the full circle to this kind of collaboration and what can happen. And then I mentioned before, we all know that there's heightened violence in our community. Not all of it stems from the school, but they are our kids, right? Some of them are our kids. And so figuring out a way that we can continue, because we are doing it slightly, but continuing to work with the school district and council, the city as a whole, to figure out ways that we can combat the violence, and ensuring that we're providing a true wraparound service in and out of school for our families, because the school district can't do it all. And I think Councilman LeBron stated, we can't do it all. And so having that support with the city will be helpful. So those are my two utopia ideas that I would love to see a collaboration happen.
Can I share one more? And I've talked about this in other spaces. Perhaps an opportunity for I don't know if it's through policy, but an equity. I know other cities have an equity approach to the work, and I think we, in our individual spaces, approach our work with an equity lens. But I'm wondering if there's an equity, like a citywide equity policy approach, so that right, when we have this shared understanding of what the priorities are, that we're also able to look at it from a resource equity perspective.
And just to add to what Superintendent is saying, I know we're going back and forth because we've talked about this, so we're dinging off of each other. Once that shared vision for the city is recognized, it's not just like this is the mayor's perspective of what the city can look like, but a real true shared approach of what the city, then that means the education side can just like pop in on the areas that are for us. And so we have really talked about like having an equity policy, not just for the district, but for the city, right? And it encompasses all aspects of it. But it is just more of a capacity. How does that look? How does that work? Because we need community involvement. And then obviously COVID hit. And so we kind of put that on the back burner, just trying to figure out how that can happen and ensuring that we get as many engagement and many people involved in that work.
Any other questions, Commissioner?
I do. So we have a system currently that we have appointees and elected officials. Is there when the appointments are coming up, is there a conversation with the administration or council as to the needs that are for the needs of skills of the board members who are going to be appointed? Is there a conversation where there's a need for a finance person? Is there a need from the business sectors to connect the educational components to the business employers? Is there a conversation, because this is a great opportunity to take advantage as a board, where you can start to kind of say, these are our needs and this is kind of who we're looking for? Or has it been a situation where it's kind of been just, this is who I'm going to present in front of you, and or there's a better process that you guys would recommend as to making sure that your needs are met, but also the elected officials at City Hall needs are met? Can you elaborate a little bit on behind the scenes without elaborating too much into the details of it?
So from the board perspective, we have shared, and I'll only be able to talk from my capacity of being the chair. And it's not with council, it's typically with the mayor, where what are the needs? What are some of the things that are needed as far as board members? So yes, to your point, has been conversations that related to, yes, we need one that understands construction, one that understands financial literacy and or accounting and budgeting. So that conversation does happen. And then there are other times where people are just presented. To be truthful, there are other times when people are presented because they might have children in the district, which is great. We need parent involvement. Or it could be that they have been on the PTO for years and they have understanding of what's going on. So there are so many different components because we do need a lot more perspective. And then there are also times where we will push back or say, hey, we don't need another business person. We need a person who truly understands our community, understands what's happening, and also a person that can relate to a lay person. So there is definitely a conversation, but again, it doesn't happen always.
That has been my experience as well in conversations with the mayor with regard to any specific skill set. And last conversation we had was relevant to financial experience, given that we are really focused on our financial sustainability strategy.
Commissioner, did you want me to answer that too, or was that
Definitely.
just directed for the
The floor is
want me
yours.
to take
Councilman
a stab
Tucci.
at it?
Yes, you can.
So there is no formal connection for us. So there isn't any clear cut, kind of consideration. I'm not sure if other council colleagues there, I haven't been involved in any kind of formal discussion. What I will say is there's always informal discussions, right? And so that always happens. And so informally, that at least from a council side, my understanding from my council colleagues and from myself is that it doesn't dive very deep into skill sets. What it does always seem to be, and this is a political response across just not Board of Education, but does it reflect the community, the diversity, right? And so, look, I'm being a Hartford person, born and raised, but not just for the Board of Ed. I think we sometimes we got to look deeper than that. For the Hartford base and the Hartford, although diversity and the reflection of the community is important, we got to look at talent and expertise and experience and the things that folks can bring to the table more so than the color of their skin or their ethnicity. And I say that because a lot of us say that we're one Hartford, but when it comes to decision making, sometimes that's hard to get to. And so I may be going out on a limb there, but I've always said that, and I'll stick to it. And so in terms of informal discussions, it's never dived. It's always been in the shallow waters of race and ethnicity.
I guess my follow-up question to the chair is there a set of skills that is necessary that the board cannot go without? The reason I'm going with this is because as a charter, we can potentially make sure that some of those appointed members will have that set of skill that is necessary. That does shorten down the pool, but I think it kind of brings some stability and a set of skills that is constant into the board. Of course, we are looking at something that will be long-term, a skill that we will foresee in the next 10 to 20 years, because the charter revision doesn't happen until 10 years. So it will definitely be a set of skill that is paramount and that will be necessary moving forward in the educational system, as if we could forecast that.
Do you want to start, Superintendent, or you want me to dive in?
From a governance perspective,
from a
and
governance
management perspective, yeah.
From a governance perspective, I think that there are some skills that can be taught, right? And so there are skills like governance skills that can be taught. How do you conduct yourself in a meeting? How do you hold a formal meeting? Do you know Robert's rules? All of those things can be taught. And so I think that some of the skills that are important for governance is understanding like contractual obligations and how they work. What is strategic planning and what does that look like? And I also know that that can be taught, but it's very important to have that skill set. I think it's important to have some financial background if you want to be a part of like the finance committee, and or one of our main goals is adopting policies, right? And I mean, excuse me, is adopting the budget. And so being able to understand the budget, again, some of those skills can be taught, but it is important if you have some financial background, at least one or two of those appointed positions. I think it's important for having some policy background. And what I mean by that is how policies are created and or processed. Some of, not necessarily my colleagues, but some, I sit on CABE's board. And so we talk about board members who have no experience on how policies are created. And so they think that just because a constituent has a problem, we need to change a policy, and not understanding the implications of what that can do. And so I think having an understanding of the process of policies, how they're created, how they're done, and then how they're adopted. And then once they're adopted, how they're implemented and going on to the management side. I think this is not a skill, but this is something that I think, and I just got to figure out how do you put it in a charter part. But commitment, many people think that the board is just like, oh yeah, I'm on the board, but there is, I always say, and forgive me, any council members on this call, but I always say that there is a level of commitment when you're on the board where we have so many meetings that balancing is very important. And I think that those skill sets are important, of balancing your work-life balance for the school board. And also one of the last things I will say, and then I'll turn it over to management, I'm sure more will come to me, is that having that understanding between governance and management is very important. There is a thin line between what a governance board can do versus influencing on the management side, and being able to articulate that to those who might not understand. And so those skills are, again, some can be developed, but are skills that when you're interviewing, you're looking and writing them down. It's important, because then you'll just have a board that feels that they can just, dive into management and or shift things that they don't necessarily have the power to do. So I know that was like a jumbled way of answering your question, because my mind is just going. But I also was going to pull up our bylaws, because our bylaws too have like specific things. So I'll get back to you. I'll put it in the chat as I turn it over to the superintendent.
I think I would add to the strategic planning piece, the understanding of progress monitoring and continuous improvement. There's, as I think about the accountability system that already exists through the state and per federal, the Elementary and Secondary School Act. There's a piece around board evaluation and of the process and the progress of the district via the superintendent. And so it's always helpful, to have someone that understands the science of improvement, and that change and improvement efforts in highly complex systems take time, and continuity of strategy and investment. The other piece, I heard the question about like forecasting out 10 years. 10 years from now, I predict that education will look very different. And I predict that education is the change and the shifts in education are going to happen faster than they have in the past. I don't know what that skill set translates into for board members, but I do feel that as an organization, we have to be more agile, and public service organizations aren't necessarily structured, right, to be agile because of all the policies and all the procedures. I know that that's something that I've begun to think about, like how do we structure ourselves to really keep up with the innovation that I foresee is going to come at us in education. So I don't know that I'm giving you a concrete answer, but it is something that I'm beginning to think a lot about, especially given what we have experienced in the last 18 months.
And I will just say, you don't have to also be like an educational scholar to be a part of the board. And so I do want to implore the charter, as you guys are looking over the charter and making those changes, not to put like a person has to be fully educated, fully involved in the education side. And what I mean by that is have a degree in education, do all of that, because there are skill sets that can come from different walks of life that will support the work. I know one of my questions was, what does a board member do? And I always break it down to the simplistic ways. Adopt the budget, make changes to policies or make policies. And then lastly is the hiring of the superintendent. And so those, again, it involves a little bit more than that, but those are our three major things. And hiring a superintendent and or managing a superintendent, those skill sets you can get anywhere, and you don't have to be like in the educational field to have those skill sets.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner DeJesus. I'm assuming that was your last question.
I just have another one. It's a system that we currently use in another commission, is through planning and zoning, where we use alternates, meaning if there is a vacancy. I know we've had issues in the past where there's vacancies of elected officials or officials that are not present at meetings, and they will serve as proxies per se. I'm absent. That person can continue that agenda item. If there is not a quorum, there will be a person there who will continue the process and will continue the agenda. I also would think that could be an alternative for a lot of people who may not be appointed, or may not have an appointment position, but to be a feeder into the Board of Education to make sure there's people there who are know the system enough, but when needed or called upon, they will be able to fill in that position immediately. And if they're qualified, or the mayor or the body wants to accept him as a permanent member, they can do so, or look out for somebody else. Will that be a hindrance for you guys if there is like an alternate members, at least maybe two, to fill in those gaps when officials or appointees or elected officials are not present, or in a hiatus? Would that be helpful?
I think it would be helpful per se. It will have to. So I always tell people it takes a good year and a half for you to really understand the dynamics of the district. And that's any district, right? It doesn't necessarily mean Hartford, it's just any district, because there are policies, there are procedures, there are protocols, there are all of these things that are in place, that to be a person who we call upon to make a decision, and you don't necessarily know what has happened or occurred can change the dynamics of a vote. And so I'm hesitant that if it's just a person that doesn't fully understand the dynamics of the district. Now, if it's an ex officio member that we're now saying, you've had the skills, you've done this, you've done that. And I'll give a prime example. I'm off the board come January. And so if there was a person, if I was an ex officio, based on what you're saying, a member, and then there's a vote that's occurring, or there's not a quorum is present, then I can be called upon because I have the skill sets or all of the things that are needed. Then I will be in agreement. But if it's the opposite, that we're just going to put people who don't have the skills, that might break up the dynamics, and that also can really put a lot of politicalness, and I know that's not a word, involved, where now we're pressuring people to vote a certain way, even if they don't have a clear understanding of what's happening within the district. So there's some pros and cons to that. You'll have to level out those pros and cons.
All right, and I do want to be mindful of the time. The meeting ends at 8:30. Are there any Are there any other questions from our members of our commission?
I have a question.
Commissioner Rubenstein.
Thank you. First of all, thank you to the three invitees for coming here and giving a very good talk. Our neighbors in other cities, while they're not as populous as we are, have full elections. I know we have a 5-4 split. However, when you look at the voting percentages, they're abysmal. The public is very little engaged. Certainly in the appointed process, they're not engaged, and very little through the party. As Commissioner Gale said, it's basically 78 DTC members that get to appoint 3 or so members that get to run. I'm interested in getting the population in the city engaged in voting and in exercising their rights. I'd like to ask the three of you what your feelings are in going for much more elected positions as opposed to appointed positions, and also your feelings on whether or not the 9 board members should run on an at-large basis or on a possible basis of areas of where you live through precincts, for instance. What's your feelings about that, all three of you?
I'll jump in because Dr. Torres, Rodriguez, and Chair Clark been answering a ton of questions. So what I'll say is we need to think of something to create like buzz, movement, voting. Something needs to be done. I think if we keep moving in the same structure, we're going to have the same results. And I think we all know that saying, the definition of insanity is keep doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different results. We need to do something. And so, just a couple things off the top of my head is, maybe potentially change the elections to a year where we have presidential elections or elections where you see more turnout. That may not necessarily equate to something beyond, the DTC appointment, but at least it gives us a start. What I will say is also from an elected standpoint, I would imagine if I was sitting and if I was sitting in the superintendent's chair and I had 9 elected officials, that would be a nightmare. That, you potentially can have 9 different directions that you want to go to. And that would be, I would say, if I was the superintendent, and Dr. Torres, you can't obviously answer for yourself. I'm just trying to make sure that everyone's okay. You need some kind of consensus and some kind of coalitions in order to move things forward. Right. So I don't think I would personally agree on 9 elected officials, but I do think we need to shake it up in a way where we have more interaction. So any kind of innovations, whether it's local innovations, if it's at-large innovations, I wouldn't be opposed to any of that. What I'm saying is that we need to do something. And so if that means, creating, things that reinvigorate the electorate around the Board of Education and the Board of Education members, I'm all for it.
For me, I think I've shared it. I would like to see an increase in the elected than appointed. Being that today is National Voter Registration Day, I'm like, go for it so that we can get more individuals involved in the voting process to really show that this is their right, that they have the right to vote and they have a right to who's representing their young people. As far as at large and or district, I think that I would prefer an at large versus district centered. I think that we already have a big division from north, south, 7th district, 4th. It's already a lot of that. And our city is too small to have too many divisions as it relates to that. I know that that's kind of the way it's worked per se as it relates to like how the town committees put people in to have the endorsement. It's sometimes centered around district wise and where people come from different districts. But I think it's important to have it citywide. And I'll turn it over to you, Superintendent.
I think the only thing that I would say, so first, Councilman LeBron, thank you for kind of channeling what my experience could or potentially would be, because you're absolutely right. As just from a, not managing, but just building capacity, because I have a responsibility also to build capacity in my board with regard to understanding, right, the strategic priorities and all of the work streams of our strategic plan. So because I have only known the current structure, you know, imagining a different structure that would have more elected could potentially result in what you're describing. So for what it's worth, right, I know what I've only operated under, and I could foresee, especially from the lens of the timelines, right? Currently, I will share a data point. So this is my 5th year as superintendent, and I've had 5 board chairs during my tenure. And so that's a lot of change. While, you know, we work well together and we get, you know, there's synergy and we cohere on the priorities, it's still, right, it still shifts and changes and lots of kind of, you know, starting over to some degree. I hope that answered your question.
Commissioner Rubenstein, anything else?
Yes, one other question. How do we get the parents engaged if there are appointments? In other towns, there are no appointments, and as I said before, the voting is very low in Hartford. Some would say abysmally low. And while I understand and share the superintendent's ideas that it could create chaos, and she might not know how to react, or a superintendent with 9 elected folks coming in on their own. However, as Councilman LeBrun said, if the process stays the same, then we can expect, I suppose, percentages somewhere in the 12%, 15% of the public voting. And is that a number that everybody feels comfortable with?
So Commissioner Rubenstein, I'm not sure if that was that a question or, I mean, I think you know, just I in agreement. I think you echoed, I think, what we all are saying. I mean, I personally, having 12% turnout, I mean, that can't be the option. And I think, from a charter perspective, no, it's not your, I would say, like, no, it's not your job for marketing and outreach and going out and voting. But I think there's still some potentiality that having some kind of change to the structure may create a spark, right? And that, rather it be, and again, with change, not to be like overall drastically reforming the system dramatically, although some people may agree and, with that as well. But I just think there needs to be some kind of change, changing the year, maybe changing the terms where, the Board of Ed, maybe 2 people come up every year, maybe changing the appointees and that it's not squarely on the mayor and it being on council, maybe change, I don't know. But either way, we can't keep making the same pot of rice and beans. We gotta change the ingredients. So that's my opinion.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Okay. Any other questions from commissioners? Okay, seeing none, I just had one quick question. Chairwoman Clark, you mentioned the issue with having the election in November and then new members coming on in January, midway through the school year. They're figuring out how things work, and it's disruptive. I don't want to put you on the spot to and ask if you have any potential solutions to that, and if you do, feel free to offer them. But I think that's something that is worth taking a look at to see if there's something that we can do there. And I think Attorney Mednick, have in your experience, have you seen other districts deal with this, or is this kind of just a built-in problem that we all school districts face?
Yeah, school districts are local elected officials, and they tend to start the term at the same time that the other local elected officials commence their term. I haven't examined, I'm looking at a list of all of the top 15 towns in terms of composition. I'll take a look at that. I believe that they're all pretty standard. There would be no prohibition in state law, but it'd be unusual to start a term substantially after an election. So if you wanted to move the election to the term to the beginning of the fiscal year, you're talking about 8 months after an election that people are starting the term. So, so it's just as illogical that council members get elected in the middle of the fiscal year and begin to serve at the beginning of the fiscal year. So I'm not sure there's a way around that, but we can look at it.
Okay.
Yeah, and so just like, and I kind of shared that in the beginning, I don't really have an answer on how it works. It is very disruptive for the school year, especially with, like, give an example, we have our strategic operating plan that we've passed, and now the election process occurred. And so now we'll have 3 new people starting mid-year who potentially might not have a clear understanding of the strategic plan and or the priorities. And I'm not saying that they don't, I'm just stating that this potentially can happen. And then also, like I said, it takes a little while for you to fully grasp the concept of what's happening. There is an orientation process where you go through training and things. And so I don't have a solution. The only thing I can think of is that there is like a built-in training part where those who are, maybe that's the ex officio part that Commissioner De Jesus talked about. Maybe the 6 months from January until the end of the school year, those members who are no longer quote unquote the elected END or appointed, that they're on for 6 months as a non-voting member, but they are able to still, partake in the meetings and share what they've experienced. And then officially, end of school year or end of June 30th, then they're completely off. And again, I'm just throwing out ideas because there's just so much that's happening where you're now working on a budget, or the person's coming in on a budget that they did not approve. They are coming in on initiatives that they did not work on and or approve on. So there's just a lot of implications that happen within a school district. And again, as Attorney Meddock talked about, it happens on our local officials as well. I think the only ones that kind of get off a little easy is our state representatives, because that's when they're true, and I don't want to say true work, but their work as it relates to being at the state capitol starts in January, February. And so it's a little bit different.
Great. Okay, that's very helpful. And I think it's something that we could certainly take a look at and, put our heads together and see if there's something creative that we can do to solve for the issue. Dr. Torres Rodriguez, is there another point you want to make about collaboration between the board and council?
I will just quickly lift that some of the things that have worked, and I'm not necessarily suggesting that this ends up in a charter, but there have been times in which I've gotten an invite, for example, to have a community conversation by either a council member or council president. And, you know, there have been constituents that have raised concerns and want to know about what's our return to learn plan as a result of the COVID. And so we've had opportunities to collaborate. And so also wanted to lift things that have worked in the past that I hope that we can continue to engage in.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you to all three of our invited guests. This has been incredibly helpful, a wonderful session, and we appreciate your insights and all of the incredible work you do for this city and for our children. And so without objection, we will stand adjourned at 8:49. Thank you all and have a great evening.
Thank you all for the invitation.
Thank you all.
Good night.